We made this.
Engage.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
Michael Burnham, pleased to meet you.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
We will continue exploring, discovering new worlds, new civilizations. That is the United Federation of Planets. That is Starfleet.
Make it so.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast. My name is Kurt North, and welcome along to our continuing coverage of Star Trek Discovery Season 1. As we are recording, we are covering Season 1 up until the week before Season 3 airs, and Make It So is going to hand over the baton to We Are Starfleet, which will be covering Season 3. So we're looking forward to that. But in the meantime, we did start off earlier in the year covering Star Trek Discovery Season 1, so we're going to continue that journey until the end. And joining me again this week is Luke Winch. Hi, Luke. How are you doing, mate?
Great. Did you nearly forget my name?
Yeah, well, do you know what? I've been saying to you off air that I'm been really struggling with everything. I've had family over, I've had job concerns and issues, and I've gone, Anyway, you're not one to talk, Mr. Craig or
Chris. It's Chris Haig, bless him. I've called him Craig a number of times now.
Yeah.
Don't know how,
Mr. Craig. You know,
I even write Craig on my notes. I don't know how. I don't know how I do it, but there you go.
Anyway, yeah. So, hello, Luke. How are you doing, mate?
I'm well, mate. Thank you very much. I've had a nice trip to Riser, and I'm now back working here with you. Excellent.
Well, I've been on a conference. I've been in a conference with Starfleet, and on how we're going to survive this crisis that we're currently going through. And it's not good, mate. It's not good.
No.
But never mind. But we are talking about the War Without and the War Within today. That's the second to final episode. That means we're 3 weeks, as I say, away from Discovery Season 3. But it also means we're 1 week away from the finale. This is an interesting one. We're outside the mirror universe now. We had a break from last week, the Vulcan Ambition, which was covered by Tony. So as we get out of there, where do you think we are right now with this episode, and what do you make to it?
It's a really interesting one, this, because I mean, in the previous episodes, there was this kind of unifying element within the team of Discovery. And Saru made that speech about, this is our maiden flight. This is the crew with a renewed sense of purpose and, upholding the Starfleet Federation values. And this one's interesting because those morals and values are stretched and tested quite a lot in this episode. And the route that they go down is very un-Federation-like. And I find it interesting that we've just left this mirror universe of ambiguous and shady kind of values and ideology, and it's interesting now that we're having to kind of use their tactics and use their ways to win this war here. So it's a really interesting kind of dichotomy between those two kind of episodes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, on my last watch that I did just before coming on today, there was a few bits that I was thinking, it's interesting. There's a little one or two little lines, like, we get the old Star Trek kind of phrase of, the needs of the one or the many. And in this one, it has a detrimental effect because you've got the needs of the one being Lorca, sending them on this journey into the mirror universe. And that whole thing has caused them to be where they are 9 months down the line. And I think that's really interesting in itself, that they went to the mirror universe because of that. And, because Discovery wasn't there, and it's basically saying that because it's been taken out of its time, that the war, it wasn't able, because the one element in this episode is the fact that Discovery took with it the cloaking information that would have helped win, either win the war or at least have a hold in battle, because the cloaks are inevitably the main thing that's really hit them hard. So I think it's interesting that, you know, just the absence of Discovery has caused that, and as you say, when you get to that kind of that mirror universe kind of aspect of when they've come back, they're having to use the techniques because of that, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and also the absence of L'Rell and Vok within the Klingon Empire has also caused this kind of competing houses trying to get one over on each other in this war. You know, there's no kind of unified kind of war against the Federation. It's all kind of trying to kill as many people as possible and trying to better the house rather than actually better the Klingon Empire.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into that because you're talking about the separate cells. You're not fighting one enemy and stuff like that, which they talk about, which we'll get into. I think it's time to jump into the episode in more depth. This episode was aired on the 4th of February 2018, the week before my birthday, ironically. And it was the episode 1, season 1, episode 14. It was written by Lisa Randolph and directed by David Solomon. And the teaser starts off just as we find as the end of last episode, where we see Philippa Georgiou being brought in through the transporter by Michael. And for me, you've got to feel really sorry for likes of the Chief O'Briens and the transporter chiefs in this world.
Yeah, because
the amount of stuff that they must have, the amount of information that they must have. I know that in a separate podcast that I talked a little bit about this, and it alludes to it a bit in this one, is during the Fight the Future minute for the X-Cast and the X-Files, there's a guy in the limo for the Well Manicured Man, and we had a bit of a joke about what was his life like having all those secrets. But then you think about the transporter chiefs, as I say, in all the Star Trek lore, they are a minefield of precious information, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you got one of them as your prisoner, you could eke some pretty good information out of them.
Yeah. I mean, don't go for the captain. The captain's too obvious. You need to go for the transporter chief.
Yeah,
you know, if that's where the real stories are.
Definitely.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, he's called to sick bay as well, and Saru starts to take Burnham to sick bay, and they start having this conversation. And I know we'll get into Ash Tyler and Michael, especially the scene towards the end. But it's interesting how that she's going through this whole thing, and that alludes to the episode name, which is The War Without and The War Within. You know, the internal struggles that everyone's having, as well as the external one, and it relates to that in a lot of ways. But it's interesting how Michael's just, you know, and we'll get, as I say, we'll get into this in a bit more detail, but Saru kind of just assumes that she will talk to Ash. And it's interesting how that she's like not having any of it. She's just in denial about even approaching him.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a dual fear within her, I think, because on the one hand, he tried to kill her physically with his hand around her neck, and that moment towards the end when she kind of reenacts that is really, really quite powerful. But also it's this internal struggle that she loved this person who is a Klingon, the very race that killed her parents. And I think she really, really struggles with facing that. So yeah, there's this kind of physical and mental struggle that she's going through, and kind of just denying herself the kind of confrontation that she doesn't want to kind of go ahead with.
Yeah, and I think it's a natural human thing to do as well. The fact that, you know, if you're going to broach any subject, and especially an emotive one, and something as strong as that, you know, I mean, obviously you don't need to necessarily be that. It could be something as simple as something you've done wrong to somebody, a family member or whatever, and your natural inkling would be not to approach it, you know, and it would take a lot of bravery to actually, you know, get over that and actually have the conversation. And I'm sure it's something that we've all had at some point, you know, that conversation where you've got to have with somebody and you just want to hold that back as much as possible. And no doubt we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get towards the end. But what did you make to the Vok and Tyler situation now? Because, you know, this is the end of its story in a lot of ways, because, you know, Vok is is no longer with us, and the fact that Saru talks to Tyler and says, won't take away his freedom, and this for me just not raged. This kind of just portrayed to me like either someone who has gone down the wrong path, and in any world, or like militias, or or even like terrorists and stuff like that, who have seen a crisis of conscience and actually have realised, and they're all coming back to the fact that they've realised what they did was wrong, and they may well have been brainwashed and stuff. That it's he can still access, but in the science fiction world, he can still access Vok's memories, but he's very much more a Tyler than he is a Vok. How do you think that was dealt with especially with Saru, the way that Saru deals with him? Because Saru's come up so much over this past few episodes, especially the last one where he's talking about this is the maiden voyage, as you're saying, and where Discovery's going, and that he is a captain in waiting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think this episode does really well is it gives every character a moment or a couple of moments to really shine. And I really like the way Saru talks to Tyler here. It's almost like a gentle and caring tone that an inquiring doctor would take with a patient. And I like, I don't think Saru blames Tyler at all. And there's a really important bit where he says, your privileges are limited, but I will not take your freedom. And I really like that. And that's a very much a Starfleet value. And I think it's an immediate kind of Saru trying to distance himself from the mirror universe as quickly as possible, because that was just a horrendous place to be in with these dark and shady values. And I like the fact that Saru is he's kind of reaffirming to himself that we are now back in the Prime Universe. This is how we're going to behave, and this is how we treat people, even someone who has gone through what Tyler's gone through.
And if we talk about Tyler in general as well, before we get to that final bit, I think it's probably a good time to talk about him in general, because there's a few things that happened to him over the course, which is more sprinkled than actually dealt with in too much detail. That we have his visit from where he's walking the corridors. I don't know, has anyone mentioned to Stamets that he's going to be walking and have this freedom? That's my first question. But so he comes across Stamets, and I find that conversation really interesting. But I'm going to pull these into one, really. That, and then we have Tilly kind of being the as you say, the Starfleet idea, kind of like the Saru of that scene where he comes in to get the food, and Tilly's the one that actually makes the first move, and then obviously people will follow that. But there's those little things that sprinkle throughout though on dealing with Tyler, and obviously kind of closing up that story arc. But it's sprinkled throughout, and I think it's done really well. It's done nicely to build up to the final confrontation with Michael down the line. Yeah,
the little moment with Tyler and Stamets is brilliant, because it's a very complex issue that they're going to have to deal with Tyler and Stamets, because Tyler's essentially killed the man he loves, and how do you approach that in a scene that's what, 35, 40 seconds long? Really, it's not long at all, and I think they do it very simply, but it's very, very effective. And it's also Stamets also admitting that Tyler is human, and the Klingon side killed Culber, and he accepts that, even though he can't really face talking to Tyler at that moment. But that point when he goes, do you feel sick and do you feel guilt? And Tyler says yes. And Stamets is like, well, at least you are human. And I think that's a good acknowledgement that maybe down the line Stamets can forgive Tyler.
Yeah.
And then the scene in the mess hall, yeah, again, Tilly is the one leading the charge and showing that Starfleet and Federation will accept and forgive, and they're all equals, and it's a nice reaffirmment of the unity of the crew, particularly now that they're not under the boot of Lorca anymore.
Yeah, and one thing, as he talking about that the crew, because obviously Cornwell comes in later on, doesn't she, and says how that this is a brilliant crew. We're going to do this now. This is kind of the end of the road. This is the final mission to try and save Starfleet, and it's been put into their hands. Although there is a special guest who turns to play at the very end, but yeah, I do like that. But talking about the mirror universe, and this comes up to the end of the credits, is that when we're on the bridge, and we almost get like the very thing that we talked about in Wolf Inside here on the bridge, except for it's Cornwell coming onto the bridge instead of Vok, and the kind of it's almost like it's a perfect way of showing just how far away the Federation are and Starfleet are, because it's now like a banded together, crew of people that have boarded the ship, because that's the way that they've turned up now. That's the way they have to do it. It's almost like a mercenary type thing, rather than being a Starfleet will just arrive in a ship. It's a case of like, what the hell's going on here? Get on board, find out the situation, and then you've got the Sarek mind meld as well. So it totally mirrors what happened in the Wolf Inside. Yeah,
absolutely. I noticed that because there was an Andorian and a Tellarite that came on board and boarded the ship, and you have that in the rebellion. I really like the way they used the mind meld with Sarek, because it is exactly a parallel to when he does it to Burnham to kind of get her identity. Yeah, I really like that mirroring, and also I liked at the beginning when Saru finds out that Burnham lied about any of his race being in the mirror universe as well. So there was quite a few plot and theme threads from The Wolf Inside that came into this episode.
There was. Were you talking about this Saru thing as well? What I particularly like, and again, it informs Saru's character, is that had that been at the beginning of the season, Saru probably wouldn't have spoken to Michael for like weeks. You can imagine that, like, look, you haven't spoken to me, but in this, he's understanding, he gets it, he's obviously disappointed, but he understands the reasoning and he moves on, and he kind of engages with the conversation, is empathetic to where that Michael's thought about it and actually said to me, well, I was doing it to protect you, understand that, and then simply moves on. Yeah, where you wouldn't have got that from Saru at the beginning of the season.
No, you won't. I think this episode illustrates how far a lot of the crew have come, like Saru and Tilly. And really, I think the only person who struggles to move on in this episode is Burnham with the whole Tyler situation. And I like the fact that you get that bit later on where Tilly is almost a little bit annoyed with Burnham that she's not moving forward with the Tyler situation, and she kind of gives her a little bit of a ticking off, which I quite like that with Tilly, because her character is so much more confident and more comfortable in that confidence as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I think that's an interesting point, actually. I didn't really think about it that way. That, as you say, Michael is our main character. She's got a lot going on. She's brought back a mirror universe Giorgio. She's got a Klingon who's tried to kill her, and who she's fallen in love with, which we'll talk about towards the end. But she has got a lot going on. But then you've got as you say, that rock, that formation of Tilly being able to tell her what to do. But on the flip side, you've got Stamets kind of understanding, but not forgiving, but understanding where Ash is coming from, and obviously Michael just isn't quite there yet. And I think because we're seeing it through her eyes, I think it's really important that we do that. Yeah. One person I don't think we've talked about on the podcast before is, what do you think to Cornwell? Because she's a really interesting character. I know she appears in season 2 as well, but what do you make to her character up to this point?
I really like her, and I think before this episode, we've just had her kind of coming in and out, don't we? And she had the relationship with Lorca, and she finds that quite hard to take at first, because her Lorca was this measured, straight-laced man, and we now find out that Lorca is no such thing. But I like how I like how she takes charge. I think she has a good sense of honor, and she is the embodiment of Starfleet. Well, she is to begin with the embodiment of Starfleet, but when they start going down that road of what they're going to do on Kronos, that's when the ideologies start to get a little stretched. The morality is starting to get a little bit stretched and tested.
Yeah, because I think we see the breaking point, don't we? Because when they arrive at Starbase 1, she's completely lost. She gets to the point where she's just like set a course, and Saru's the one that's having to really push her to say, what do you want to do? And she's completely lost, because she's like, Starfleet is her back. The Starfleet has always had her back. She is that through and through. That she herself has had issues. Obviously, the fact that she blows up the fortune cookies, which I thought was a lovely touch.
Yeah.
I didn't click. Has not clicked on the previous watchings of this until the one I just watched today, and I was like, I have never noticed that before, and I don't know why. But yeah, she is kind of like she's as you say, Starfleet through and through, but she's also got this. This thing behind her. She's willing to stand the ground, and she is an equal to L'Rell. And the conversation with L'Rell and her, because of what's happened in previous episodes, but also here, where it's the breakdown. It's the fact that when L'Rell says, "You have to conquer us," it's not the Starfleet way. That's the only way you're going to defeat the Klingons. And it's a breakdown of her character, and I do. That's why I think that Cornwell's really interested in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, that scene with L'Rell is a really, really interesting one, probably one of the highlights of the episode. And I like the way Cornwell really challenges L'Rell's beliefs, and really lays into T'Kuvma, saying he's an idiot basically, and that he's wrong. And even L'Rell admits he was wrong that humans don't have courage, because they do. And I think this moment is the kind of it's the straw on the camel's back that snaps for Cornwell. And that, I don't think if she hadn't had this conversation with L'Rell, I don't think she would have accepted Giorgio's secret plan to do what they're going to do in the final episode. That moral line is crossed, I think, at that point before it's even said.
Yeah. What do you make to the this premise of the different sects? So Sarek says it pretty much what we need to say, really, is that you're not fighting against a united force, and obviously Middle East is probably the best analogy for it, really, is that you're not fighting against a particular thing, you're fighting against ideals of each other, but each of the 24 sects have a different version of what their idea are and have become very sect-like. So they're not as what L'Rell and T'Kuvma wanted was all houses to be joined together to become the Klingon Empire as we know them in the Next Generation, but you're fighting on all fronts, so you just have this, you don't know what each of the tactics are going to be different from all 24 houses, that it's just literally like animals scrapping with each other. And obviously Starfleet aren't used to that anyway, but the fact that they can't even formulate the any kind of democracy because of the breakdown in that, and in the T'Kuvma and L'Rell stuff, that they've not been around either, that it's just a really interesting way of actually going about the show. And it's something I probably didn't give it as much due when I first watched it, but watching back, it really is interesting that that's the way they went, because it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and what I also find really interesting is that the way the Klingons are acting, and the way the houses are, they're doing suicide missions, they're fighting dirty, they're slaughtering women and children. It's the antithesis of what the Klingons should be doing, which is fighting with honor. And I like the fact that they've literally discarded that completely, and they're just slaughtering at will for no rhyme or reason other than to win over the other houses.
It's so full in depth of things you just don't. I mean, obviously, a lot of people will take it straight away, but it's upon rewatching it and coming back through it, like we have been doing, it's really interesting the way they do it. Now, going back to another thing you mentioned, like Giorgio in this episode, she almost changed tactics, because at the beginning she's very much, the Empress, that she sits down, Michael's there, Sarek comes in, you've got not only that, you've got Cornwell coming in to talk to her, and she's very off with them, and this is what's happening. It's only when Michael starts to talk about certain things and Giorgio clicks onto a way, not particularly out of there, but there's a moment within the episode where Giorgio realizes, well, actually, I can use this to my own will. The way the war is, the fact that I've got this information. And obviously by the end we see the reasons for that, but it's really interesting how that kind of formulates, and actually within her mind, is the way that she become useful, because Cornwell even has said, Michael's assured her that she doesn't have an ulterior motive, but her motive is to fit in this new universe, and this is the best way of her fitting into that and having her freedom, very similar to what Tyler, like you said before, with Tyler and that conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting that Giorgio only relates to a world that is filled with conflict and war, and it's when Cornwell says, we don't know what to do with you yet, but we've got a war to win. And when she says that, Giorgio's eyes kind of light up, and she sees a way that she can kind of relate to. I like the fact that Giorgio also uses Sarek as a way in as well. When she finds out that he's the surrogate parent of this universe's Burnham, that's her way in with the secret plan, and I really like the way she does that.
Another section, which is the Star Trek element of it, is that, and I like what they've done here with the the terraforming of the moon. The fact that you've got all this warmongering stuff going on, and you've got all this situation happening, and the sex and everything else. That you've got L'Rell, you've got Cornwell, you've got the Federation, you've got the Klingons, you've got Ash and Michael not speaking, you've got Stamets, you've got Tilly, and it takes time to actually go through what would be a very kind of Star Trek thing to do, and that's to create life on a planet that doesn't have life. And it's obviously to do with the spore thing, and the sheer waste that we've got. And he's also, in looking back on it, as a good way of actually indicating just how much of the spores have gone, because they were meant to be right throughout the universes and all kinds, but we're left to trying to use the very first bits of spore that we have, which is something that Stamets didn't want to do in the first place, but then to make spores just enough for what they need to use. And I think it was nice that they actually included that in this episode, because I think looking back on it, it would be empty without that. It's just a nice little diversion just to keep us on our toes a little bit.
Yeah, I do like it. And, the fact that they need the spores so they can actually enact their plan to jump into the middle of the planet, which is very cool, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a nice little nod to the Genesis project, isn't it, in Wrath of Khan, and this whole kind of hard sci-fi element, and firing these capsules down to the ground and growing this forest very, very quickly, which is, it's done very quickly. And I know it has to be, it has to be because they have to move the plot along a bit. And I did read into it that they'd realised that they'd done a lot of mirror universe stuff, and they realised, that they're on episode 10. We've got 14 slots. We need to get back to the prime universe and get the rest of this plot moving. And I think they did leave themselves probably just quite a short amount of time to do that. It doesn't feel rushed in the episode, but knowing that bit of background information, you can kind of see the choice to have this forest grow up very quickly in this one scene.
Yeah, it does, and it the way it goes, 2%, 4%, 8%.
Yeah.
Exponentially. And I thought, is this going to go exponentially right the way through? And it doesn't. It jumps to sort of, because I was like, it's gone 2, it's gone 4, it's gone 8, it's gone 16. Is it going to go 30? No, it doesn't go 30. And it was like, oh, come on. It went very, that spore is very, very quick growing.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a very cool sequence to watch.
And it's, yeah. Well, I'm currently replaying Command and Conquer, and you forget how similar that is to obviously Dune, which is obviously coming out soon, which is probably where the genesis of this idea came from. That when you go do the harvesting in Command and Conquer, and this reminded me a bit of that and Dune. So I was like, I can just imagine it's Star Trek Discovery, Command and Conquer kind of thing, with all those like things being fired into the planet and making your own harvests and stuff. But yeah, that was just an offbeat thing for that, what I've been doing recently. But yeah, I do find that interesting. And the actual, you mentioned it, the actual plan. One of the things that potentially I picked up on this, and it threw me back actually, was the actual plan itself. So there's this discussion that's had between Starfleet and Discovery, where they're saying, do we protect the Earth, which is something we've seen many a time on Star Trek, or do we go to the planet and both are without risk? Both are with risk. Sorry. And and Sarek says, we've done it the Starfleet way. It's just we've got to do it a different way, like you were saying with Cornwall, and even Sarek's pull into that, because the conversation between Sarek and Giorgio is a really interesting one as well. Yeah. We'll get into that in a second. But the conversations had of what's best to do it, and the decision that's made is almost in my head what Michael says at the beginning of the season, where it says you need to cut off its head, because that's effectively what you're trying to do. Yeah. That's what this whole mission is, and I think that's really interesting that it bounces back to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Giorgio calls it the tumor. You have to get to the tumor of where this cancer spreading out, but you have to get to the source of the tumor and get rid of that, because otherwise it will just keep spreading and spreading and spreading. Yeah, it's a nice little callback to what Burnham said.
Yeah, and it's emotionally relevant to it as well. Mm-hmm. And we're going full circle that this is like what's happened at the Battle of the Binary Stars has come to this point where they're effectively having to, again, in that one, it was Takuvma, that fact that if you brought Takuvma back and embarrassed him, that, the war would end. This is basically, if you embarrass the Klingon homeworld by doing what you need to do, they'll go back to where they were. They'll retreat because you've embarrassed them. And it's the same dichotomy, and it's really interesting how they've as I say, mirrored that. And I can see why the mirror universe popped up in the storyboarding, because a lot of it is about mirroring. A lot of it is about mirroring themes and people and emotions and stuff. What did you make to the Giorgio and Sarek stuff? The kind of the mother father figures of Michael. How did you come up? What do you think to that?
Yeah, that was an interesting little conversation with those two, and one of the reasons why I think Giorgio chose Sarek to propose the plan. And I like how she first uses, the parenthood, the surrogate parenthood to kind of use that as a connection. And then the fact that he's Vulcan and he will look at this plan logically and not emotionally, I think is definitely a motive to why she chose to tell him about the plan, because he'll look at it logically and Starfleet tactics are no longer working. And even though this morally compromising solution is perhaps emotionally and morally the wrong thing to do, logically it's the only way to stop the Klingon Empire. And I really like the underlying context of that scene.
Yeah, it's so, there's so many things at play with the kind of the emotional aspects, and the fact that you do have Sarek there who has gone through it. And it's interesting early on as well when they're talking about the what was it? Where was it? It was kind of like when there was a moment when they were talking about that was it, when they were talking about the mirror universe, and they were saying how it's got to be kept secret, because if word was got out that you had family across the other side and you had people and people you love and things, that people would be desperate to get to that other side to bring them back or to see them again, and that has to be kept secret. And they talk about orphans, and the camera deliberately looks at Sarek and Michael, and I thought that was really, really nice, little touch there, because I thought, the fact that they are coming back to that, and they are sort of looking at that. But I never thought of the mirror universe in that way. That was something that was really interesting in itself, that, you know, these people have lost so much over the last 9 months to a year, that, you know, something as simple for us as we see it from the outside looking in, that the mirror universe, it wouldn't have factored in my head that, because we know it so well, that we're so objective to it, is that people might do that. They might go, well, there's an option of seeing a loved one again. And I thought that was a really nice touch, that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of links in with the overall question of the episode, which is how far would you go to win a war? How far over the line will you go to achieve something? And I think if that information got out, if you wanted to see your son or your daughter or your mother, father, or husband again, you would do anything in your power to try and get to that mirror universe. But it is, you know, but I also like the way they use that to also match up with Star Trek canon. So the first recorded incident of the mirror universe is still when Kirk visited it, and I think I think it's crossover, the DS9 episode, where Bashir says that the first recorded incident was Kirk in Mirror Mirror. So I like the way it's
that's a good point. Yeah.
It's all it's all made to, you know, make sure that the canon and the history is correct, as well as that underlying context of how far would you go.
Yeah, I never thought of that. I mean, I suppose that because you're right in the mire of it, that you wouldn't want to report it at that point, and once it's gone past, you're not going to, unless someone asks for the Freedom of Information Act, where you're physically asked to find out all information about the mirror universe, it wouldn't be necessarily needed, because it's not needed in that way. Whereas in Discovery, it is something that, you know, it's harrowing in the things that's happened to everyone. And, you know, you would potentially go there. You would have a desire to do that. And as you say, how far would you go? Whereas in the later ones, it's not necessarily about that. So, yeah, it didn't even factor into that. I mean, talking about callbacks as well, is that obviously Archer gets mentioned by name, but is also alluded to early in the episode. Yes. With, you know, the actual NX-01, in fact, that no one's been to Kronos before. For 100 years anyway, and the fact that, you know, Archer's mentioned, which was a nice, you know, obvious callback to make, but it's still nice when they actually do that, both in the subtle stuff like you're saying there, but also, you know, the fact it's more overt in that situation where they're saying about the Klingon stuff. So that I thought that was nice. So the other main thing, and we've been alluding to it throughout this recording, is the Michael and Ash get together. There's a lot that goes on here. There's a lot of information as well. There's a lot of kind of the creating life and Michael going through her issue, but we've also got Ash dealing with his. For me, it's one of the scenes I remember most from season 1. When we were tasking ourselves with doing this season, I was thinking about certain things that I remember well, and this was one of the ones that jumped out immediately to me. And it's such a good scene. What did you make to it, and how they talk through their conversation? Because even like little things like Michael's taking a step back when Ash approaches her, and things like that, you know, the trauma that they've been through, both of them, and the fact of having to talk the way through it, and in this kind of counselling session between the two of them. Yeah,
everything in this scene is perfectly done. And as you say, that step back, and then when they're halfway through the episode and she's becoming a bit more open to conversation with him, that's when she kind of moves past him to the window, and I like that move, that physical move that she does. And I like there's that theme of the tether that we talked about in The Wolf Inside that is kind of, it comes back here in this episode and in this scene. I really like that, and that they've both lost, you know, this lifeline to each other, and I think what Burnham's really struggling with is that she still loves him, and, you know, as she says as she's walking out, it's letting you go is not easy, and it's this kind of metaphorical snapping of the tether, and also the admission that, you know, I've had to look at myself in the mirror, as it were. I've had to look at myself and find my way back on my own after what she did at the binary. After what she did at the Battle of the Binary Stars, and having to find her way back by herself, and she's basically telling him, you have to do this on your own. Yeah.
I think the fact that she said, I've had to crawl, I've had to do. I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but I've had situations in some way similar to that where you've had to crawl. And you've had to sort of go through it, and it's a very solitary experience, and having to process that, and I'm sure that there's elements to my own personal history which I still haven't reconciled together, and it's such a long thing to do, but it is the way that they've incorporated it here that you've got that tether, but that tether can only last for so long, and it had to be broken because of what. It's not even about, she knows logically, and because the way that Michael is designed to set up is that she's grew up on Vulcan. She knows logically that is not Vok, it is Ash Tyler, but it's not about that. It's about the very thing that was overstepping the bounds, and the fact that you had my hands around my throat kind of thing. I looked into your eyes and stuff. And logically, she knows everything, but emotionally, she can't shy away from that herself. And the fact that she's managed to confront this is another step in her kind of world as well. But she's gone through the process; he's only just beginning. And I do like that they kind of allude to that the fact that it is something you're going to have to go through alone. You can't rely on me because of what has happened here. You've got to own up to the things that you have done. But in obviously the sci-fi world, it's difficult. It's a difficult situation to be in, and it's a nice way of doing it in the fact that he wasn't. He is ultimately responsible for what he did, even though he wasn't in control of what he did. So, but it's an interesting dilemma for him to be dealing with, and the fact that he doesn't think he can make it without her. But he's going to have to learn, and he's going to have to go through that. And I think the way that the scene plays out is a really good testament to the writing, because it does make sense in where Michael is, that she's got to get beyond this. It's gone too far, and I do like that.
Yeah, and it kind of occurred to me now that the conversation that Tilly has with her, which is her basically saying, you have to close the book on this. You have to go and see him, confront him about your feelings and where you are, and that's essentially what she does to Tyler, saying, you have to do this alone. You can't rely on me or anyone else. This is your war. This is your battle. And I like that kind of those two different dichotomies of those two different conversations. But basically, Tilly is telling the same thing in an underlying context way. She's saying the same thing to Burnham, what Burnham then tells Tyler, which is closing the book on those two and moving forward.
Yeah, and if we look at it from another point of view, we're one episode away from the end of the season, so so it has to be an element of that as well. But yeah, so I mean, it's certainly an interesting episode, and obviously an interesting penultimate episode as well, to be dealing with all of these things. It does take its time. It take the things I think it's 48 or so minutes, 49 minutes. Next week is just a 45-minute one, and it has a lot to deal with. And it focuses. I mean, as I say at the beginning, it was the title is kind of obvious in what it wants to do. It's dealing with all the internal struggles that people are having, and also the actual war itself. If we were to talk about the war in general, the wolf inside and the mirror universe stuff was basically the end of the universe as we know it. This is and sometimes I'll have a bit of are we going down that route? Are we going down the end of life as we know it kind of thing? Can we have more of a singular story? But what, and I've discussed this in Make It So before, in the Picard thing. Did we have to go that far? But in this one, we've got the Klingon War on the brink of, annihilation of Starfleet. Do you think that that itself works? Or do you think it's on the edge, teetering on the edge of not believability, but kind of of acceptability of how far they actually are in this war?
Yeah, I think I don't want to talk about it too much, because I think we'll talk about certain elements of this in the next episode. But I think the ends justify the means in the end, and I think this extreme story, the utter annihilation of Starfleet, the extreme measure that they use or attempt to use justifies that storyline, and I think it's a good way of testing all the characters and testing the premise of what the Federation is. So I think it works thematically, definitely, and I think it does work story wise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all I've got. Have you got anything else you wanted to bring up that I've probably missed? Because I probably have missed loads.
There's just little character moments, really. I mean, I loved a bit when they get to Starbase 1 and Cornwell basically freezes up. I love the fact that it's Saru that steps in and basically says, "Get us out of here, warp, get us out of here." And then when she's basically sat on the chair in utter devastation, he's like, "We need orders. Let's do this." I love the way that he, as we talked about, he's come so far now, and he is Captain Material, and I just love that little character moment for him in that episode, in that scene.
And you think that towards the back end of the episode, back end of the season, that you could quite handle Saru being a captain, and it's like there's a new captain coming. You're like, oh, poor Saru. Yeah. And obviously we get a very good captain in next season. Yeah. But it's just like, oh, Saru deserves it. He deserves it. But obviously I'm sure you've got other stuff. The one thing I do want to mention is that obviously the Giorgio reveal and what they actually did, and have put Giorgio in charge of the mission itself, and the reactions to that from both Michael, Saru, and probably the transport chief. Yeah. But what did you make to that reaction? Yeah, I mean that was a kick in the gut to Burnham and Saru, really was, and you can see it in their faces. But you can also see this. They have to hold their composure as well, because they have to look as though they're pleased to see her, I guess. And that reply that Burnham gives, yes, Captain. It's just full of venom. I think she's really pissed off that this has happened. And of course, we'll probably get a bit more of the action next episode as well. But yeah, just that kind of right punch in the gut moment is pretty hard. It is, absolutely. So unless you've got anything else, that'll be it for this week. And we've got next week. And then, as I say, not that I'm getting excited, but we've got, and I am actually quite excited for season 3. But season 3 is out in 2 weeks, so I'm really looking forward to it. So is there any final thoughts before we say au revoir? Not really. I mean, I think this episode it's a very good character piece for pretty much all the primary characters, and I like the way they've done this kind of character piece as the penultimate episode, and the next episode we're going to get all the action and the conclusion of the story. So I like the way that it is primarily quite a talky episode. It's a lot of characters looking at themselves and trying to close the book on some issues and moving forward to try and end this war. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think, as I said, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, that it takes its time. It slowed itself down a little bit. It's given it time to breathe. You've got the 48 minutes. You've got the Star Trek planet, moon, with the spores. You've got the talky bits. You've got long scenes with Michael and Ash, but you've got even like shorter ones with Tilly and Stamets, and Saru, so that it's all touching on, the repercussions of everything that's happened over the past 14 episodes. And I think as a putting your chess pieces out ready for the finale, I think it does really good in that position. And we'll see what next week brings. But obviously you'll be back with me for the final episode. Yep. And then we'll be taking a break, and we'll all enjoy season 3 together, and we'll be coming back after season 3 airs with a few specials. But until we do come back next week and have this break, where can people find you online? What are you up to? I think I alluded to maybe one of your podcasts earlier with Chris and Craig, but where can people find you online? Personally, they can find me on Twitter at Luke_Winch.
Yes, I do a podcast called Observing the Pattern, which is about the TV show Fringe that ran for 5 years. We do an episode-by-episode analysis. You can find that on Twitter at the OTP Podcast, on Facebook by typing in Observing the Pattern, and we are on Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, all the usual places. I'm also co-host of Rarely Going, which is our Star Trek Lower Decks podcast. I think we're reaching the final 3 episodes now, so I think I'm coming back for the final episode for that one.
Okay, cool.
And again, that's under our Make It So Twitter handle, I believe, still at the minute.
Yep, it is. Yep, Jean-Luc Picard. Yep.
And that's it. That's where you can find me at the minute.
Okay, cool. You can find me on Twitter at rmuldrake. It's RMULDRAKE. In the coming weeks, we'll be having the Time Is Now return, which is the Millennium podcast, when you can find that at the Time Is Now pod. And the X-Cast will be coming back shortly as well. We're just making plans to start recording season 6. We've done a couple of episodes, but Carl and Sarah and I will be talking the beginning very shortly of season 6. So that's coming. So that's the X_cast. So those are the 2 best places. You'll also find me on the Red Dwarf podcast, which will be coming back shortly as well. And you can find that at Red Dwarf Pod, and that's Shipwrecked and Comatose. So those are the best places to find me. But Luke, we have to set a course for Kronos this week. So if you could possibly set a course for me.
Is that warp or are we jumping?
I think we'll have to jump. We're gonna have to go to Black Alert, I think.
Okay, I'll get those spores ready then. Okay, let's do it.
Excellent. And engage.
Elsewhere on We Made This. Sin and Mortuary podcast.
Right, Rob, just to laser align and realign the topic of discussion.
Yes.
Would you like to take a dive straight in to the X-Files movie for me, please?
Yes, I would. We open on Gillian Anderson in her lingerie. No, sorry, that's the fan fiction one, isn't it, that people keep talking about?
That you wrote, yeah.
I did not write, and I will sue you, sir. Right, yes, Silence of the Lambs. Directed by Jonathan Demme, 1991.
Pretty Fly, a 90s nostalgia podcast.
I think it says a lot about our humanity if we go down that road with Hannibal Lecter, and if we kind of, like right at the end of Silence of the Lambs, he's going to have an old friend for dinner. And... which is a great line, by the way.
Tremendous line.
It's a movie full of great lines.
Have an old friend for dinner.
But you're kind of happy for him, aren't you? Like I am.
A little bit. I think it's important to remember that even someone who's a psychopath who doesn't have, or a character that's a psychopath that doesn't have that normal range of human emotions, they are human.
Observing the Pattern, a Fringe podcast.
Why is Nina so invested in getting Tyler back? Because, she even offers to put up the money. Like, Massive Dynamics will cover the ransom. So, she's heavily invested. And then, him basically saying, yeah, I took work home with me. And so it kind of, something doesn't add up in that area.
Nina's a very intriguing character because... at least up until this point, and probably well into season 2, you are never sure of her allegiances.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.